is guidance for today, and wisdom comes with light to lead the way, and I follow where my highest truth resides, and safely living there I will abide. Within me now I ride the wave of peace, and steady streams of blissful joy increase. I bathe in all the love God has for me, and in His arms I feel all cares release. Within me now my eyes are clear to see, and angels guide me to my destiny. My dreams of greatness rise to live in me, and I embrace it all with harmony. Within me now I have the wings to fly, and high above I see infinite sky, and I soar to where all-knowing does unfold, and all my clouds of darkness turn to gold. Within me now, within me now, within me now.
A lot has changed in East Tennessee over the centuries. We've moved from log cabins to virtual online church. But in every age, we've sought to create a place that we could call home. So come into this spiritual home. Come, let us worship together.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yes, again, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, whoever you are, ours is no caravan, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yes, again, whoever you are, wanderer,
lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair.
Come yet again, come.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our great covenant.
Rejoice and come in. Enter, rejoice and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Hello. I have a story to share with you today that is a true story that takes place somewhere that is familiar to some of us in our TVUC community and maybe new for some of us as well, but it is a place that we have been deeply connected with for many years, and that is called Highlander, the Highlander Center for Research and Education. But this is a story that took place in 1959, back when Highlander was known as the Highlander Folk School. Now, a little bit of background, and some of you who are watching this may know more than I do, and you can fact check me in the comments if I get details wrong. But Highlander was founded in 1932 by Miles Horton and some other folks, and in the early years, Highlander was very active in the labor movement and worked with coal miners in particular to unionize and get better working conditions for the laborers, for the coal miners and other workers. But by the 1950s, Highlander was deeply, deeply active in the movement for civil rights and for justice. And the people at Highlander believed that all people are equal, that all people should be able to learn and work and play together, and that the most important thing is that we work together for justice. But in those days, there were laws that prevented a lot of those things from happening. In those days, black people and white people were not allowed to go to school together in the public schools by law. They couldn't eat in the same cafeterias. They couldn't get married if they fell in love. But Miles Horton and the other folks at Highlander believed that all of that was nonsense. And they thought that all kinds of people should go to school together and should learn together. And a lot of well-known people went to Highlander to begin learning and to take part in training and to share their expertise with others as this work continued. And so, although it was against the law in those days for black people and white people to go to school together in the public schools, Highlander always had people of all kinds and all colors there together to be in part of that learning environment and to work together. And so this story takes place in 1959 at a time when a group of kids, of high school students, were at Highlander. They were from a choir in Atlanta, Georgia. They were visiting Highlander and they were staying there overnight. Now, one of the things that people like to do most of all at Highlander was make music together. And I suspect there might be some folks with stories about music from Highlander. And one of the stories is about a song called We Shall Overcome that was popularized at Highlander. It became a song for the movement in those days and became really well known thanks to Pete Seeger, who learned the song at Highlander. Now, these kids from the choir were at Highlander this night, and they were watching a movie together one evening in the main hall. And what do you do when you're watching a movie? You want to see the movie well. They had the movie projecting, and so they turned off all the lights so they could see the movie better. But then all of a sudden, something they didn't expect happened. All of a sudden, a bunch of cars roared up outside, and men with guns came out of the cars and rushed into the building. Now, in those days, there were people who did not like the work that Highlander was doing. They didn't want it to succeed. They wanted to find ways to frighten the folks at Highlander, to threaten them, to even shut down the school. And so the kids knew, they didn't know who those men were, but they knew that they were looking for trouble. Somebody turned off the projection of the movie, and then everything went dark because they had the lights off. Now, it was that moment that the men with guns realized that they might have made one mistake so far, and that is that none of them had ever been in Highlander before, so they didn't know where the light switches were. And they started to yell at the kids to turn on the lights. But nobody moved a muscle. And instead, the kids began to sing. They began to sing, "We Shall Overcome." And the words of the song begin like this. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. There are more verses that they sang. Verses that some of us might know already, verses about walking hand in hand, about being free, about all being together, the whole wide world around. In that scariest of all situations, those kids sang in the darkness together. But then, one girl who was there, maybe 14, 15 years old, began to sing words that were new. She added a new verse, and as she sang, the other kids joined her until they were all singing together in the darkness. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. This startled the men who were there. The kids were the ones who were supposed to be scared, but those gun-toting men began to feel nervous. They fumbled around a little longer, and before long, do you know what happened? They turned around, they ran back to their cars, and they drove away. And the kids learned something that night. They learned something that perhaps they already knew, but they reassured themselves in that moment, and they learned as they sang together in the dark in a time that was so frightening, when they felt so in danger and were, when they may have felt terribly alone in the dark. They learned how strong and brave they could be if they stuck together. And the verse that they added to We Shall Overcome has become part of the song that is sung every time it's sung to this day, all of these years later. And now Highlander was shut down in 1961 on a trumped-up charge. They shut down the folk school, but it reopened the very next day as the Highlander Research and Education Center and moved here to Knoxville. It was here in Knoxville for 10 years before it then moved to Newmarket, where it is to this day, continuing to work for justice, to provide education, and bring the community together. And we are so grateful for all the work that Highlander and the folks there and the folks here in our community have done over the years. And we know that together, we can indeed find a way.
A reading by Maya Angelou. Some people who exist sparingly on the mean side of the hill are threatened by those who also live in the shadows, but who celebrate the light. It seems easier to lie prone than to press against the law of gravity and raise the body onto its feet and persist in remaining vertical. There are many incidences which will eviscerate the stalwart and bring the mighty down. In order to survive, the ample soul needs refreshments and reminders daily of its right to be and to be wherever it finds itself. I was fired from a job when I was 16 years old, and I was devastated. My entire personal worth was laid to waste. My mother found me crying in my upstairs room. I had left the door ajar, hoping for consolation. She tapped on the door and stepped in. And when she asked why I was crying, I told her what had happened. Her face suddenly became radiant with indulgent smiles. She sat down on my bed and took me into her arms. Fired? Fired? She laughed. What the hell is that? Nothing. Tomorrow you'll go looking for another job, that's all. She dabbed at my tears with her handkerchief. So what? Remember, you were looking for a job when you found the one you just lost. So you'll just go looking for a job one more time. She laughed at her wisdom and my youthful consternation. And think about it. If you ever get fired again, the boss won't be getting no cherry. You've been through it once and survived. My mother, the late Vivian Baxter, retired from the Merchant Marines as a member of the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union. She practiced stepping off the unexpected road and cutting herself a brand new path any time the desire arose. She inspired me to write the poem, Mrs. V.B. Ships? Sure, I'll sail them. Show me the boat. If it'll float, I'll sail it. Men? Yes, I love them, if they got style. That to make me smile, I'll love them. Life? Of course I'll live it. Just enough breath until my death, and I'll live it. Failure? I'm not ashamed to tell it. I never learned to spell it. Not failure. Go out. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of things not working out the way they should. Just push against gravity, stand up, refresh your soul, and go do it. Joy, good morning. We are here to celebrate that we woke up this morning. And I'd ask you to lift up in your thoughts, send light to in your prayers, people who did wake up, but they're struggling. And whether that struggle is emotional, mental, financial, if it's loneliness, if it's working under stress, whatever it is, we have members who need you to send them thoughts of love, of caring, of community. The prayer for today is this one. I will not live an unlived life. I will not live in fear or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid and more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my insignificance, to live so that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom, goes on as a fruit. This prayer was by D. Markova. Blossom, be open, be brave.
Good morning, welcome to TVUUC. My name is Claudia Presley and I'm the Director of Administration. Today is a Generosity Sunday. That means that all contributions that come in that are not marked as a pledge go to the General Operating Fund of TVUUC. The way you can give is to go to tvuuc.org/give, or you can text give to the number 73256, type in TVUUC and the amount that you would like to give. Once again, thanks for joining us and have a blessed day.
Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Sigamos adelante, siempre adelante, siempre adelante, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, never turning back, never turning back. Amaremos con pasión, siempre con pasión, siempre con pasión, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna reach across our borders, reach across our borders, reach across our borders, never turning back, never turning back. Vivamos sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna reunite the family, reunite the family, reunite the family, never turning back, never turning back. Familias reunidas, siempre reunidas, siempre reunidas, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, never turning back, 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 never turning back.
Peace.
We love you.
Did you know that Saint Joseph is the patron saint of real estate? And according to tradition, if you want to sell your home, what you need to do is get yourself a Saint Joseph statue and bury it in your yard. But according to one website, you need to do it a little bit more than just bury it in your yard. You need to take your Saint Joseph statue and wrap it up in a cloth and bury it upside down in your yard, at least 12 inches deep, close to the for sale sign, which should be close to the street. Or if you own a condo, you can bury St. Joseph in a flower pot that's set in front of your door. Now, all of this may sound like a lot of superstition to you, but I can assure you, if you've been in a position where you needed to sell a house and couldn't seem to get the market to move, couldn't get that house off your shoulders, well, even the most scientific and rational and logical person will be tempted to lean on the saints. Sometimes we just want to close the deal. Sometimes we simply want a weight lifted off our shoulders. Sometimes we simply want an obstacle removed from our path. And we're willing to move beyond reason in our efforts to do so. Now, the St. Joseph tradition comes from the West. In the East, in India, among the Hindu tradition, there is the god Ganesha, the elephant god, who is known as the remover of obstacles. And the image that I get often is, it's like each one of us is a rider on the back of Ganesha, who is removing obstacles from our path with a trunk, sweeping up boulders and sweeping up fallen trees or debris that is blocking our way and helping us to move forward. So if you have an obstacle in your path in India, then you might turn to Ganesha. Or if you have a house you can't sell, then you might be tempted to turn to St. Joseph in the West. Now, all of this may sound like superstition, but I can assure you, if you've ever been in a position where you felt completely powerless, then you know that this is also a very human thing to do. Now, the idea that God might look like an elephant is very foreign to the Western mind. However, in the East, in India, there's a lot of emphasis on what theologians would call developing a non-anthropomorphic theology. In other words, there's a lot of emphasis on the realization that divinity does not look like us. Divinity takes many shapes and forms and can be seen in all of creation. Therefore, divinity might take the form of a man or a woman or a being that transcends gender, or might take the form of a swan or a buffalo or an eagle or a lion or a tigress or an elephant. However, if the idea of believing in a God that looks like an elephant is too big an obstacle for you, let's remove that obstacle. In fact, if the idea of believing in God at all is an obstacle, let's remove that obstacle this morning. And let's talk about the power to overcome. The power to overcome obstacles, to overcome opposition, to overcome barriers, to overcome challenges. Because that's something we all face, regardless of our beliefs. Now, sometimes the obstacles of life are outward. They're outside of ourselves. They are things like traffic and detours and bad weather or a pandemic or a closed business, an economic downturn, a lost job, a rejection letter, a breakup, a lack of resources. There are many different obstacles that can confront us that are outward. But there are also inner obstacles. Inner obstacles like self-doubt, fear, that inner critical nagging voice, the inner obstacle of burnout, despair, hopelessness, apathy. So whatever our beliefs, whatever we think with our heads, it's important for us to know that spirituality at its deepest level is about our ability to align with the power that removes obstacles, busts through barriers, overcomes opposition. Spirituality is found when we rally for a good cause and we are able to sing together that we are not afraid and we shall overcome someday. There's a Buddhist story that is told about a king who was worried his people were getting very lazy, so he decided to create a challenge for them. And he got his men to roll this giant boulder in the middle of the main road that went through the city that was the capital of his kingdom. And he sort of sat aside and sort of went into the shadows to see how people would handle this challenge. Well, the first person to walk up to the boulder just started cursing it, just was angry at the boulder, but didn't make any effort to move it, just walked off. The next person come along got really furious, lost their temper, and kicked the boulder, but then they stubbed their toe and they limped off, and they didn't try to move it either. After a while, a few people came, and they would push for a while, but they'd give up, and it was pretty much a half-hearted effort. Finally, a person came along who was really pushing very hard, seemed to be giving all their strength to moving the boulder, but it didn't seem to be making any difference. But then that person got an idea. went off and got this big old log, which they used as a lever, and they used the lever to dislodge the boulder so that it rolled down the street and out of the way, and the traffic was able to flow again. And underneath the boulder, the person discovered there was a purse of gold coins that were created as a reward from the king. And it also had a written message, and the message said, "The obstacle is the way. The obstacle in the path becomes the path. Every obstacle is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to change, and improve." Now that's the story. But it kind of reminds me of something I learned from the 20th century Unitarian theologian Henry Nelson Wyman. Here's a book about him that was written by Bruce Southworth, who grew up in our church and went to our Sunday school. And he wrote this book and he decided to give it the name At Home in Creativity. And the reason he chose that title is because for Henry Nelson Wyman, creativity and divinity were synonymous. And if you think about it, every obstacle in our path is an opportunity for creativity. Therefore, every obstacle in our path has the potential to become an encounter with divinity. The Stoic philosophers often said the obstacle is the way. And one of the reasons they felt this way is because they felt that human beings weren't made to sort of be adapted to the status quo or a static reality, that we were made to change, that we were made to be creative, that we were made to blaze new trails and forge new paths. And here's the thing, the newer the path, the more obstacles are in it. And the more we forge our own paths, the more likely we are to encounter obstacles. So those of us who are wanting to live creative lives, we are constantly given an opportunity to turn an obstacle into the way. Behind me is the church banner that was designed with the colors from the women's suffrage movement. And this week marks 100 years since women gained the right to vote. So that seems like a very special occasion to celebrate, a very patriotic moment in the life of our country. And one of the things that made the suffragist activists so powerful is they knew how to turn an obstacle into the way. Many of them were arrested and taken to jail and given expensive fines. And many of the ones in the streets were verbally or physically assaulted. Many were handcuffed. And some were forced on to eat food when they were on hunger strike. But one of the things they learned was the more they were mistreated, the more publicity they got for the cause. So much so that when Lucy Burns was handcuffed to her bars in her cell by a police officer, she later turned to a friend and said, "Splendid. It gets worse and worse." She knew the worse it got, the more publicity she would get for her cause, and the more the cause would advance. Now, that's not easy to do, but it is a remarkable thing that activists can do. But the philosophers, the ancient philosophers, the Stoic philosophers, they remind us we can do this in our everyday lives. We can turn our everyday obstacles into the way. We can use them to advance our cause, advance our direction. Many times when we see an obstacle, we get angry. But it's not the obstacle itself that makes us angry. It's our emotional reaction to the obstacle. It's the way our emotions color how we see the obstacle. And if we can back off and become a little bit more detached, we might see it as an opportunity to be creative and to think new thoughts and to do things in a different way. Now, I realize that this is easier said than done. And I'm also very much aware that I'm prescribing medicine that I don't always want to take myself. Many years ago, I was watching an episode of The West Wing, and I love that show. I think it's a wonderful show. But at some point, I realized that this show, the things that happen in the show are what I hate about life. Because so often, nothing goes according to plan. big mistakes are made that foul everything up. Somebody sabotages somebody else's project. It's all about disruption. It's all about things that don't go the way you'd hope they go. And that's what drives me nuts about life. And yet, somehow, it makes for a very good television. So I know that I'm prescribing medicine that's not easy for me to take myself. But even so, I'm mindful of a conversation I had with the Reverend Lynn Strauss when she was minister of this church and I was religious education director. We were driving up to the Mountain Retreat Center, and we were, which is in Highlands, North Carolina, and we were driving through those beautiful, gorgeous Smoky Mountains. Now, Lynn is from Illinois, where it's very flat, and at some point she turned to me, and I'm pretty sure she was joking. She said, "You know, just think how much faster we could get there if it weren't for all these mountains." And it made me realize that if you're a flatlander, you might look at the mountains that are all around us and see them as obstacles that prevent you from getting someplace quickly. But these mountains that surround the Tennessee Valley fill me with breathless awe and wonder, and they are an important part of why I love living in East Tennessee. It's just they aren't an obstacle to the way. The mountains are the way for me. So here is my hope for you as you move forward. I don't know what your obstacle is in your personal life, but it is my hope that in some way you will find a way forward that lets you make the obstacle into a way. And if that doesn't work, you can always buy a St. Joseph statue. The good book says, with faith we can move mountains. But sometimes maybe it's a good thing just to let mountains be where they are. Let the obstacles be the way. And so, let me say, Prophetic Church, the world awaits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the power of love. Proclaim the truth that makes us free. As we leave this virtual spiritual home, and in this time of social distancing, I invite you to find new ways to stay connected. Send an email, make a phone call, like someone's social media post, reach out in some way so that we can be a community together. Go in peace.